The underground lab was a marvel of alien engineering. A sprawling network of gleaming corridors, sterile chambers, and containment pods stretching as far as the eye could see. The air was cold, unnaturally still, as if the very oxygen had been stripped of its warmth by the machines that hummed incessantly in the background. Rows of monitors flickered with alien script, their data points measuring the life signs of the beings encased in translucent pods, each one suspended in a glowing, viscous liquid. High above the rows of pods, a group of Gathari scientists watched their experiment unfold. Tall, gaunt creatures, their skin a pale blue that seemed to shimmer under the cold fluorescent lights. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed no emotion as they scanned the data. These were not beings ruled by compassion or empathy. The Gathari Empire was one built on conquest, and its scientists were trained to view all life as mere variables in a grand equation of power and control. One of them, Chief Scientist Kalzath, stood at the center of the room, his thin fingers dancing across a holographic display. His gaze lingered on one particular pod, where a human form floated motionless, connected to a web of wires and tubes. His voice, cold and clinical, echoed through the lab. High above the rows of pods, a group of Gathari scientists watched their experiment unfold. Tall, gaunt creatures, their skin a pale blue that seemed to shimmer under the cold fluorescent lights. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed no emotion as they scanned the data. These were not beings ruled by compassion or empathy. The Gathari Empire was one built on conquest, and its scientists were trained to view all life as mere variables in a grand equation of power and control. One of them, Chief Scientist Kalzath, stood at the center of the room, his thin fingers dancing across a holographic display. His gaze lingered on one particular pod, where a human form floated motionless, connected to a web of wires and tubes. His voice, cold and clinical, echoed through the lab. "Phase 3 has begun," Kalzath announced, his voice devoid of warmth. "Initiate awakening sequence for Subject Alpha." The other scientists nodded in unison, tapping commands into their consoles. Across the room, lights blinked in rapid succession, and the hum of machinery grew louder. Inside the pod, the human form stirred, a subtle twitch of the fingers, a slight movement of the eyes beneath closed lids. In Pod 17, Subject Alpha, known to his creators as Connor, was awakening. Connor's senses were overwhelmed before his mind could fully comprehend it. There was no gradual rise from sleep, no slow ascent from dreams. It was as though he had been yanked violently from unconsciousness, thrown into a world that was both familiar and foreign. His eyes snapped open, the viscous liquid distorting his vision, casting the lab in a nightmarish glow. His heart pounded as his muscles tensed against the restraints. He could feel the tubes embedded in his body, the wires connecting him to machines that buzzed with alien life. Panic surged through him, primal and fierce. But something held him back from fully succumbing to it. An eerie sense of calm that wasn't his own. It was as if something inside him had changed, something that wasn't entirely human anymore. The pod's liquid began to drain, and Connor felt his feet touch solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The glass slid open with a soft hiss, releasing him into the lab. His legs were unsteady, his movements sluggish, as if he were moving through molasses. He stumbled, catching himself against the side of the pod, breathing heavily. He wasn't alone. All around him, other humans, no, hybrids, were emerging from their pods. Men and women, each one tall and muscular, their features sharper than they had been in their previous lives. Their eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural light, a byproduct of the Gathari DNA spliced into their genes. They, too, looked disoriented, blinking rapidly as they took in their new surroundings. The cold, sterile lab. The alien faces watching them from above. Connor's head throbbed as fragmented memories flitted through his mind. Memories of a life before the lab. He could recall flashes of laughter, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the sound of his own voice calling out to someone. But the images were fragmented, incomplete. His mind struggled to piece them together, but each time he got close, they slipped away, buried beneath the overwhelming surge of new sensations. One of the Gathari scientists approached, its elongated limbs moving with a fluid grace. It stood before Connor, looking down at him with an air of detached curiosity. Kalzath. Subject Alpha, Kalzath said, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic. You are the first of your kind. A hybrid, a perfect fusion of Gathari and human DNA. You will serve the Empire well. Connor blinked, trying to make sense of the words, but his mind was still foggy. His muscles twitched, still adjusting to the new power that coursed through them. He could feel the raw strength in his limbs, a strength that was foreign yet intoxicating. He wanted to test it, to stretch it, to understand what he had become. We have given you gifts, Kalzath continued, his tone patronizing. Enhanced strength, superior agility, accelerated healing. You are more than human now. You are a weapon. A weapon? The word echoed in Connor's mind, sending a chill down his spine. He glanced around, noting the other hybrids standing at attention, their faces blank and unresponsive. Something about them seemed off, as if they were only half-conscious, their minds dulled by whatever control mechanisms the Gathari had implanted. But Connor, he felt different. The control wasn't absolute. He could still feel the pull of something deeper, something human. His heart raced, not just from the unfamiliar power coursing through him, but from an unshakable feeling of unease. He clenched his fists, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the restraint still attached to his wrists. He wasn't just a weapon. He was still himself, still human. At least part of him was, and that part of him was screaming to break free. Kalzath must have sensed something in Connor's demeanor because he stepped closer, peering into his eyes with renewed interest. You are responding better than the others, the alien scientist mused. Fascinating. The human spirit is more resilient than we anticipated. Connor's gaze hardened. He didn't like the way Kalzath spoke, as if he were little more than a test subject to be observed and catalogued. Rage flickered inside him, a small flame that he tried to stifle, knowing that it would do him no good in this moment, but the flame refused to die. Kalzath's gaze lingered for a moment longer before he turned away, dismissing Connor with a flick of his wrist. Prepare them for the next phase, he ordered his fellow scientists. We will push them further, test their limits. The other Gathari nodded and began moving about the lab, adjusting equipment, preparing for the next round of experiments. Connor's restraints were removed, and he was led to a separate chamber, where more tests awaited. As he walked, his mind raced. He didn't know how or when, but one thing was certain. This place wasn't going to hold him forever, and neither were the Gathari. Connor was led through a maze of sterile corridors, his thoughts still hazy but growing sharper with each passing moment. The farther he moved from the pod, the more aware he became of his body. How powerful it felt. How unnaturally precise his movements were. His mind, once clouded by confusion, began to focus. He knew one thing for certain. He wasn't like the others. Something inside him was still burning, something that refused to be subdued. His escort, a pair of silent Gathari guards, brought him into a large chamber, starkly lit by white lights embedded into the walls. At the center stood a massive circular platform, surrounded by hovering drones and an array of alien machinery. Several other hybrids were already there, their faces expressionless, waiting like statues for the next phase of their conditioning. Connor joined the others, his mind racing as he tried to understand what was happening. He could see the same glazed look in their eyes, the same unnatural calm that the Gathari had instilled in them. But as he scanned the room, he caught the eye of one hybrid, a woman, tall and strong, her gaze sharp and calculating. Unlike the others, there was a flicker of life behind her eyes, a spark of something human. Before he could say anything, a booming voice echoed through the chamber. Welcome to Phase 2. Kalzath stood on a raised platform above them, his gaunt figure framed by the glow of the monitors that hovered around him. His alien eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he surveyed the hybrids below. Today, Kalzath began, his voice resonating with authority. We will test your limits. You have been given strength beyond any human's imagination, agility that surpasses the greatest warriors of your kind. Now, you will prove your worth to the Gathari Empire. The hybrids remained still, their expressions blank, Connor, however, felt a wave of resentment swell in his chest. Prove his worth? To the Gathari? No, that wasn't why he existed. He wasn't some puppet to be used in their conquests. He was more than that. He had to be more than that. Kalzath gestured toward the platform, and the lights dimmed. The floor beneath them began to shift and vibrate, and suddenly, the room transformed into a massive arena. Alien technology projected images of various terrains and obstacles, creating a complex battlefield that filled the space. Jagged cliffs, dense forests, and crumbling ruins materialized around them, the environment shifting every few seconds, as if the arena itself was alive. "This is your proving ground," Kalzath announced. "You will face each other, test your abilities, and eliminate the weakest among you. Only the strongest will survive." Connor tensed, his instincts screaming that this wasn't just a test, it was a culling. The Gathari weren't interested in creating soldiers with any sense of individuality. They wanted weapons, tools to be used in their endless conquests, and the only way to make sure those tools were effective was to pit them against each other, weeding out those who couldn't handle the pressure. Suddenly, the hybrids around him sprang into action. Their movements were swift, aggressive, as if some unseen command had triggered their attack. They charged at each other with inhuman speed, their fists crashing into flesh and bone with terrifying force. The arena was a flurry of violence, enhanced soldiers battling without hesitation or mercy. Connor dodged the first blow aimed at his head, his reflexes faster than he could have anticipated. His body responded with an agility he had never known, twisting and weaving through the chaos with ease. His senses were heightened, every sound, every movement registered in vivid detail, but there was no time to process it all. He was in a fight for survival. A hulking hybrid barreled toward him, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Connor braced himself, feeling the raw power in his muscles surge as he met the attack head-on. Their fists collided with a sickening crack, but Connor didn't falter. Instead, he pivoted, using the hybrid's momentum against it, and slammed the creature into the ground with bone-shattering force. The hybrid didn't get up. Connor's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through him. This wasn't just a test. The Gathari were forcing them to turn on each other, stripping away any humanity they had left. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly cold. "Impressive," Kalzath's voice echoed from above, his tone dripping with amusement. "You fight well, Subject Alpha. Your instincts are sharp, your strength formidable. But will it be enough?" Connor's eyes darted to the woman he had noticed earlier. She was holding her own against two other hybrids, her movements graceful and calculated. She moved with precision, using the environment to her advantage, delivering a series of devastating blows to her opponents. Then their eyes met again. In that split second, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were different, both of them. They weren't like the others, mindlessly obeying the Gathari's commands. There was something else driving them, something deeper. Freedom. Without warning, the woman turned and sprinted toward Connor, her expression intense but not hostile. As she neared, Connor braced himself, unsure of her intentions. But instead of attacking, she skidded to a stop beside him, her voice low and urgent. "We can't keep doing this," she hissed. "They're going to kill us all." Connor's mind raced. "What do you suggest? There's no way out of here." "There's always a way," she replied, her eyes blazing. "But we can't do it alone." He glanced around at the chaos unfolding in the arena. Hybrids were falling left and right, their bodies crumpling under the sheer brutality of the fight. It was clear that the Gathari were weeding out the weak, but what terrified Connor more was how easily some of the hybrids accepted it, how willing they were to kill their own. Connor nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm with you, but we need a plan." The woman glanced over her shoulder, assessing their surroundings. "We need to survive this first. When the test is over, they'll take us back to the cells. That's when we make our move." Before Connor could respond, another hybrid lunged at them, its fist swinging toward the woman's head. She ducked under the blow and countered with a brutal strike to the hybrid's ribs, sending it sprawling to the ground. Connor wasted no time, driving his elbow into the hybrid's chest, knocking the wind out of it. Kalzath's voice echoed once more, cold and detached. Enough. The remaining hybrids froze, their bodies going rigid as if controlled by some unseen force. Connor felt it too, his muscles locking against his will. He struggled to move, to fight against the control, but it was no use. Whatever the Gathari had done to them, it was powerful. Phase 2 is complete, Kalzath said, his voice filled with satisfaction. The weak have been culled. The strong will continue. Connor's body relaxed as the paralysis lifted, but his mind was far from calm. He exchanged a glance with the woman, both of them knowing that the real fight was only beginning. They had survived the test, but now they had to figure out how to escape before the Gathari's next phase began. "We'll get out," the woman muttered under her breath, as the guards approached to escort them away. "We have to." Connor nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "What's your name?" "Lena," she replied, her eyes sharp and determined. "And I'm not going to let them win." Neither was Connor. As they were led out of the arena and back into the cold, sterile corridors of the lab, one thing became clear. The Gathari had underestimated them. They had enhanced their bodies, given them strength and speed beyond that of any normal human. But they hadn't accounted for the fire that still burned within them, the human spirit that refused to be extinguished. Connor and Lena weren't going to be slaves to the Gathari. They were going to fight back. The cold metal walls of the holding cells felt even more oppressive after the chaos of the arena. Connor leaned against the back wall of his cell, his mind racing as he replayed the events of the fight. Lena had shown up out of nowhere, her sharp instincts mirroring his own, and together, they had survived the first culling. But he knew that wouldn't be enough. The Gathari wouldn't stop until they had honed the hybrids into perfect, obedient soldiers. Connor couldn't allow that to happen. He could hear the distant hum of machinery and the footsteps of the alien guards patrolling the halls. In his hand, he flexed his fingers, marveling at the strength he now possessed. The Gathari had given them something extraordinary, power that went beyond anything a human could ever hope to achieve. Yet that strength was nothing without freedom, and freedom wasn't something the Gathari were willing to grant. Connor's eyes darted to the tiny camera in the corner of the room. It followed his movements, a reminder that even in this confined space, he wasn't alone. He had been monitored since the moment he was brought here, every thought and action under scrutiny. But even with their surveillance, the Gathari had overlooked one critical flaw. They couldn't understand the human mind. They didn't know the fire that drove him. They had underestimated the very essence that made humans dangerous. The door to his cell slid open with a soft hiss, and Lena was pushed inside by a towering Gathari guard. Her eyes met Connor's briefly before she moved to the opposite side of the small, dimly lit room. The door sealed shut behind her, leaving them alone with the quiet hum of the alien machinery. "You all right?" Connor asked, his voice low. Lena rubbed her wrist where the guard had gripped her. "Yeah, just sore." Her eyes flicked to the camera. "We don't have much time. They're always watching." Connor nodded. "I know." Lena stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's something you need to know about this place. It's not just a lab. It's a training ground. They're preparing us for something bigger. I've overheard the guards talking. The Gathari are getting desperate. They need soldiers, and fast." "For what?" "The war," Lena replied grimly. "They're losing. Their enemies are closing in on them, and they're running out of time. That's why they created us, to be the perfect soldiers. They think that by enhancing humans with their DNA, they can create an army strong enough to turn the tide." Connor frowned. "If they're so advanced, why can't they just fight their own battles?" "Because they know their limits," Lena said. "They're strong, but they lack something we have. That's why they're mixing their DNA with ours. They're trying to create hybrids with human traits, resilience, adaptability, and something they can't quantify: the human spirit." Connor clenched his fists. "And they think they can control that?" Lena's eyes hardened. "They'll try, but they don't understand what makes us human. They can't just erase our will to fight. That's their mistake." Connor exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of their situation settle in. They were more than just experiments. They were weapons. The Gathari intended to use them as tools of war, and once they had perfected the process, they would likely discard the ones who didn't meet their standards. He couldn't let that happen. They had to escape, and soon. "What's the plan?" Connor asked. Lena moved closer, her voice barely a whisper now. "There's a weakness in their system. They're so focused on controlling us that they've overlooked something basic: communication. The Gathari rely on a centralized network to monitor and control the hybrids. If we can disrupt that network, we can sever their hold on us. It won't be easy, but it's our only shot." Connor's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. "Where's the network hub?" "Deep in the lab," Lena replied. "It's heavily guarded, but we don't need to fight our way in. There's an access tunnel near the medical bay, a maintenance shaft they use to transport equipment. I've been studying the guards' routines. There's a small window of time just before they shift patrols, when the area is left unguarded. And once we're in, we'll plant an EMP device," Lena said. "It'll fry their control systems long enough for us to escape. After that, it's a straight shot to the surface. There's a landing bay where they transport supplies. If we can get there, we can steal one of their ships." Connor leaned back against the wall, his mind working through the plan. It was risky, but it was their only chance. They had no allies, no outside help, just the two of them against an entire alien species. But he had been in impossible situations before, and if there was one thing he knew, it was that humans didn't give up. Not when the odds were stacked against them. "How do we get an EMP?" Connor asked. "We don't exactly have access to advanced tech." Lena gave him a sly smile. "That's where I come in. I've been borrowing supplies from the lab for a while now. Bits and pieces, things the Gathari don't think twice about. I've got enough to build a makeshift EMP. It won't be pretty, but it'll work." Connor stared at her, impressed. "You've been planning this for a while." Lena shrugged. "Ever since I woke up here, I knew I wasn't going to be a puppet for the Gathari. I've been waiting for the right moment. And now that you're here, we can do this." Connor nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "All right. When do we move?" "Tonight," Lena said. "Once the guards finish their shift rotation, we'll have about 10 minutes to get to the maintenance shaft and plant the EMP. After that, we'll have to move fast." Connor stood, his muscles tensing as he prepared himself for what was to come. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to die in this lab. He wasn't going to let the Gathari control him or turn him into their weapon. They were going to fight back. As the hours passed, Connor and Lena waited in tense silence, their minds focused on the plan. Every sound, every flicker of light outside the cell door felt like the start of something. And then, finally, the moment came. The lights in the corridor dimmed, signaling the end of the guard's shift. Lena nodded to Connor, and they moved quickly, silently, toward the door. Lena produced a small, metallic device she had hidden beneath her uniform. A stolen access card. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they slipped into the hallway. The corridors were eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of machinery. They moved swiftly, staying close to the walls, avoiding the security cameras Lena had memorized. They reached the maintenance shaft without incident, and Lena quickly unscrewed the panel, revealing a narrow tunnel leading deeper into the facility. "Once we're inside, there's no turning back," Lena whispered. Connor nodded. "Let's do this." They crawled into the tunnel, the walls tight around them. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the sound of their breathing echoing in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a small, dimly lit room filled with cables and machinery. "The network hub is just through that door," Lena said, nodding toward a large, reinforced door on the far side of the room. Connor's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the door. This was it, their chance to break free. He glanced at Lena, who was already assembling the EMP from the parts she had stolen. Her hands moved quickly, her face set with determination. "Ready?" she asked, holding up the device. Connor nodded. "Let's end this." With a deep breath, they approached the door. Lena connected the EMP to the control panel, her fingers moving deftly over the controls. The device beeped softly, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, the network hub pulsed with energy, a web of glowing cables and monitors that stretched across the room. This was the heart of the Gathari's control over the hybrids, their leash. Connor stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. "Let's blow this thing." Lena nodded, activating the EMP. The device hummed to life, its energy building as the countdown began. Connor's heart raced as he watched the seconds tick by. This was it, their chance to destroy the Gathari's control and take back their freedom. 5, 4, 3. Suddenly, the room was filled with a deafening alarm. Red lights flashed and the door behind them slammed shut. "They know!" Lena shouted. Connor's mind raced as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors. They had been discovered. The sirens blared, and the flashing red lights cast long shadows across the room. Connor's pulse quickened as the reality of their situation hit him like a freight train. The Gathari knew they were there, and reinforcements were closing in. He could already hear the sound of heavy boots pounding down the hallway, the unmistakable rhythm of alien soldiers marching toward them. "Lena, how much time?" Connor barked, his eyes darting to the EMP device. 30 seconds, she replied, her voice strained as she frantically worked to secure the EMP to the main control panel. "We just need 30 more seconds." Connor's mind raced. 30 seconds might as well have been a lifetime with the Gathari closing in. He moved to the door, checking the locking mechanism. It was jammed shut, their only exit now blocked by the Gathari soldiers. They were trapped. "We can't wait in here," Connor growled. "They'll break through before the EMP goes off." Lena didn't look up. "We don't have a choice. We have to make sure the EMP does its job, or none of this will matter." The door began to shake as something heavy slammed into it from the other side. They were trying to break in. Connor knew the Gathari were relentless. Once they decided something needed to be done, they would stop at nothing to achieve it. That included turning this room into a slaughterhouse. "I'll hold them off," Connor said suddenly, his voice resolute. He stepped toward the door, fists clenched, the alien strength surging through his muscles. "What?" Lena shot him a horrified look. "You can't." "I don't have a choice either," Connor interrupted. "You finish setting the EMP. I'll buy us the time we need." Before Lena could protest, Connor grabbed a length of metal pipe from the floor and positioned himself at the door. His enhanced senses kicked into high gear. He could hear the Gathari on the other side, barking orders in their guttural tongue. The door shook again, and this time cracks began to form around the edges of the frame. Connor took a deep breath. He had no idea how many soldiers were waiting for him on the other side. He only knew that he had to hold them back long enough for Lena to finish their mission. "Connor, wait!" Lena called out. "If you go out there, you might not make it back." He turned, offering her a tight smile. "We'll make it, Lena. We have to." With a final, resolute nod, Connor slammed his fist into the door panel. The mechanism whirred, and the door slid open, revealing a squad of Gathari soldiers on the other side. Their dark, insect-like exoskeletons gleamed under the crimson lights, and their glowing, multi-lensed eyes locked onto Connor with murderous intent. Without hesitation, the first soldier lunged at him, a long, jagged blade in hand. But Connor was ready. He sidestepped the attack, bringing the pipe down with bone-shattering force against the alien's arm. The Gathari howled in pain, its weapon clattering to the floor. The rest of the squad moved in unison, their weapons raised. Plasma rifles hummed as they powered up, and Connor's instincts screamed at him to move. He leaped behind a support pillar, just as a barrage of plasma bolts scorched the air where he'd been standing. The heat from the blasts singed the edges of his clothing, but Connor barely felt it. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, drowning out everything but the need to survive. "Connor!" Lena's voice crackled over the noise. 20 seconds. "I need more time!" he shouted back, his voice hoarse as he deflected another attack. He swung the pipe like a bat, catching a Gathari soldier in the chest and sending it sprawling to the ground. The soldiers closed in, their movements calculated and precise. Connor fought like a cornered animal, every strike a desperate attempt to keep them at bay. He felt the impact of their blows, the sting of their claws, and the crackle of their weapons. But he didn't let up. He couldn't let them break through. One of the Githari, larger and faster than the others, charged at him from the left. Connor barely had time to react before the alien was on him, its claws tearing at his arm. He grunted in pain, feeling the sharp edges dig into his skin. But he twisted, using the momentum to throw the soldier off balance. He delivered a powerful kick to its midsection, sending the alien crashing into a wall. 10 seconds! Lena's voice was urgent now. Connor felt his strength waning. The Githari weren't just skilled. They were relentless, each soldier more dangerous than the last. His enhanced body was pushed to its limit, muscles burning, lungs heaving for air. He could feel the cold edge of exhaustion creeping in, threatening to overtake him. Suddenly, a sharp, searing pain shot through his side. One of the soldiers had landed a blow, its blade cutting deep into his flesh. Connor gasped, his vision swimming as the pain threatened to knock him off his feet. But he couldn't fall, not now. "Connor!" Lena screamed. 5 seconds! With a roar of defiance, Connor surged forward, swinging the pipe with every ounce of strength he had left. He struck the closest Githari, sending it sprawling to the ground, then spun on his heel, facing the others. His body screamed in protest, but he stood his ground, blood trickling from his wounds. 3 seconds! Lena called out, her voice frantic. The Githari soldiers hesitated, sensing the shift in momentum. Connor could see the confusion in their eyes, the hesitation in their movements. They didn't understand why he was still standing, why he hadn't collapsed under the weight of their assault. But that was the difference between them. The Githari fought with precision, with cold efficiency. But Connor, he fought with something they couldn't replicate. He fought with heart. 2, 1. There was a sudden surge of energy, and then the lights in the room flickered and died. The EMP detonated with a powerful hum, sending a shockwave through the facility. The control panels sparked and short-circuited, and the Githari soldiers let out guttural cries as their weapons and armor systems shut down. For a moment, everything was still. The sirens, the lights, the hum of machinery, all of it was silenced. Connor staggered backward, his chest heaving, and collapsed against the wall. The Githari soldiers were disoriented, their systems offline. It was the break they needed. "Connor, we did it." Lena rushed to his side, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear. "We're free!" Connor blinked, his vision hazy from blood loss and exhaustion. He could barely process her words, but he managed a weak smile. "Then let's get out of here," he rasped. Lena helped him to his feet, and together they moved toward the maintenance shaft. The facility was in chaos, the Githari scrambling to restore order. But it was too late. The control network was down, and with it, the Githari's ability to monitor and control their hybrid creations. They had done it. But as Connor stumbled through the darkened corridors, he knew this was only the beginning. The Githari had tried to control them, to turn them into weapons. But now the hybrids were free. And they would fight for more than just survival. They would fight for their humanity. The surface of the planet was a stark contrast to the chaos below. Above, the barren landscape stretched on, illuminated only by the dim glow of distant stars. But below, deep within the Githari underground facility, something monumental had shifted. The hybrids were free. Connor and Lena climbed out of the maintenance shaft, breathing the cool air of the surface for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. They were battered and bruised, but alive. The EMP had done its job, disabling the Githari's control systems, and now their fellow hybrids were no longer under alien command. Connor winced, his side still bleeding from the wound he'd taken in the last battle. Lena was at his side, supporting him as they made their way toward a rise overlooking the facility. From this vantage point, they could see the remaining Githari forces scrambling to re-establish control over the base. "We did it," Lena whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The hybrids, they're free." Connor nodded, though his face was grim. The battle wasn't over yet. "They'll come after us," he said. "The Githari won't let this stand. They've lost control, but they still have the numbers." Lena's eyes flickered with fear, but her resolve hardened. We have to fight back. We can't let them recapture us or anyone else. Connor grunted in agreement, clutching his side. His human instincts, mixed with his alien-enhanced abilities, screamed for him to rest, but he couldn't afford to stop now. Not when the stakes were this high. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the ground, and they turned toward the facility. The Gathari had regrouped faster than expected. Out of the shadows, hulking war machines emerged, towering over the alien soldiers. These mechanical behemoths were armed to the teeth, and they were moving toward the facility's exit, intent on recapturing the hybrids and quelling any rebellion. Connor's jaw tightened. We have to stop them. But how? Lena asked, glancing at the massive machines. We're outnumbered, and the hybrids are still scattered. They don't know how to fight as a unit yet. Connor's mind raced. The hybrids might be stronger now, their free will restored, but they weren't soldiers, at least not yet. And without a coordinated effort, the Gathari would pick them off one by one. But Connor knew there was something more powerful in them than just raw strength. It was the human spirit, the will to survive, the will to fight for something greater than themselves. We lead them, Connor said firmly. They may not be trained, but they have what the Gathari don't: heart. We inspire them. We show them that we can win. Lena hesitated, then nodded. How do we gather them? Follow me, Connor said, grimacing as he stood straighter. He could feel the pain radiating from his wounds, but he forced himself to keep moving. Together, they descended toward the facility's entrance. As they neared, they saw groups of hybrids emerging from the shadows, their eyes wary and filled with uncertainty. Many of them were young, barely understanding what had just happened. They had been raised in captivity, trained to obey, and now they were free. But freedom was a strange and terrifying concept. Connor stepped forward, addressing the crowd. His voice rang out, clear and strong. Listen to me. The Gathari created us to be their weapons, to be slaves in their wars. But now we are free. We don't have to fight for them anymore, but we do have to fight for ourselves, for our right to exist as something more than tools. The hybrids murmured among themselves, eyes wide as they looked to one another. Lena stood beside Connor, her presence a reminder of their shared struggle. The Gathari will come for us again, Connor continued, his voice growing louder. They want to take back what they've lost, but we are stronger than they ever imagined. We are more than just their creations. We have something they will never understand, something they fear. He paused, letting his words sink in. The hybrids were listening, their attention focused on him. We have the will to fight for our freedom, Connor declared. Not because we're programmed to, but because it's our choice. We fight for each other, for a future that belongs to us, not to them. One by one, the hybrids began to stand taller, their fear replaced by determination. They had spent their entire lives being told what to do, but now, for the first time, they were being asked to choose, to fight for something that was their own. A young hybrid, no older than 16, stepped forward. Her eyes were fierce, and she raised her fist in solidarity. I'll fight. Another hybrid joined her. Me too. And then another, and another, until the entire crowd stood with Connor, their voices rising in unison. We fight! They chanted. For freedom! Connor felt a surge of pride. This was what the Gathari could never understand. They had enhanced human strength and agility, but they hadn't anticipated the power of unity, of hope. These hybrids weren't just soldiers. They were a force of will, of human resilience. But as the ground rumbled beneath them, they knew their first test was coming. The Gathari war machines were approaching fast, the sound of their heavy treads echoing through the valley. Connor turned to Lena. We split into teams. Take the hybrids who can move quickly and hit the machines from the sides. We'll draw their fire from the front. Lena nodded, her expression serious. And what about you? Connor smiled grimly. I'll be at the front, where the action is. Without another word, Lena took off, rallying the hybrids into smaller units. Connor watched her go, feeling a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. He didn't know if they would all survive this, but he knew they had a chance a chance to show the Gethari what it meant to fight for freedom. As the war machines came into view, their massive forms towering over the battlefield, Connor stood at the head of the hybrids. He could see the Gethari soldiers moving in behind the machines, ready to sweep through and reclaim their lost subjects. Connor raised his fist high, signaling the start of the battle. "Remember why we fight," he shouted. "For freedom, for each other, for everything they tried to take from us." And with that, the hybrids charged. They moved as one, their collective strength and determination driving them forward. Plasma bolts lit up the sky as the Gethari war machines unleashed their deadly arsenal, but the hybrids were fast, darting in and out of cover, using their enhanced agility to evade the onslaught. Connor led the frontal assault, his body moving with a precision he hadn't known he possessed. His alien-enhanced reflexes kicked in, allowing him to dodge incoming fire and strike at the vulnerable joints of the war machines. He could feel the pain in his side, but he ignored it. There was no time to think about pain now. The hybrids struck from all sides, overwhelming the Gethari forces with their sheer ferocity. They had no formal training, but their desire for freedom fueled every attack, every punch, every blast of energy. And slowly, the tide began to turn. One of the war machines stumbled, its legs buckling under the relentless assault. Another was brought down by a group of hybrids who had scaled its back, tearing apart its control systems. The Gethari soldiers, realizing they were losing control, began to retreat, their formations breaking as panic set in. Connor fought through the chaos, his focus unwavering. He saw the Gethari commander in the distance, barking orders in a desperate attempt to regain control. But it was too late. The hybrids had already won. With a final, powerful blow, Connor took down the last war machine, its metal frame crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust and debris. The battlefield fell silent, the sounds of war replaced by the quiet hum of victory. Lena reappeared by his side, her face streaked with dirt but filled with triumph. "We did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Connor nodded, breathing heavily. "Yeah, we did." But as he looked out over the battlefield, he knew this was just the beginning. The Gethari would return, and the hybrids would have to be ready. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for every human, every species that had been oppressed by the Gethari's rule. "We'll be ready for them next time," Connor said, his voice filled with determination. Lena smiled. "I believe you." And as the hybrids gathered around them, celebrating their victory, Connor knew that the Gethari had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. They had tried to create weapons, but instead, they had created warriors. And warriors fight for freedom.